Carlos Alcaraz had caused some controversy or debate in the tennis world when he gave an interview that said, yeah, I actually like to go to Ibiza, I want to go dance, I want to take time off, from the grueling schedule. Do you think that's good?
Everyone has a different personality, I did too. I was not a guy my life was not only tennis, and tennis.
There's a beach in Ibiza where Carlos Alcaraz goes every single year after a Grand Slam. And for a long time, people were furious about it. His own team had concerns. Commentators questioned his commitment. Fans debated whether a player of his caliber should be spending time partying on an island instead of training. But then something happened that nobody could argue with. He came back from that island and won Wimbledon. Then he did it again and again, and the wins kept coming. Now, with Alcaraz sidelined by a wrist injury and the criticism louder than ever, one of the greatest champions the sport has ever produced stepped forward to silence the noise. Rafael Nadal, a man who won 22 Grand Slam titles and gave his entire body to this sport, looked into a camera and said something that genuinely caught people off guard. He didn't just defend Alcaraz. He admitted that he was doing the exact same thing all along. He just never told anyone. Let's go back to 2023 for a moment, because that's where this story really starts. Alcaraz had just been knocked out in the French Open semifinals, and instead of retreating to a training base or immediately preparing for the grass court season, he flew to Ibiza with his friends. The reaction was immediate, and it wasn't kind. There were whispers that he wasn't serious enough, that he was too young and too carefree, that the great champions before him didn't behave this way. His own camp reportedly had doubts. The optics, people said, were wrong. Then Wimbledon arrived, and Carlos Alcaraz walked on a center court and beat Novak Djokovic, one of the most mentally fortified competitors the sport has ever seen, to lift the trophy. Suddenly, the Ibiza trip looked a little different. Suddenly, the critics went quiet, at least for a while. He went back to Ibiza in 2024. He won the French Open that year, then Wimbledon again, completing what the tennis world was calling the Channel Slam. Back to Ibiza in 2025. Runner-up at Wimbledon, and a French Open title followed. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. Whatever was happening on that island, it was working. The rest was turning into results, and the results were extraordinary. But the criticism never fully went away, because it never does when someone operates differently from what the establishment expects. And now, with Alcaraz dealing with a wrist injury serious enough to pull him from the next 2 Grand Slams, the conversation has reignited. Some have pointed to his lifestyle. Some have speculated about his preparation. Some have suggested, without any real evidence, that a more disciplined off-court routine might have prevented this setback entirely. Into all of this walked Rafael Nadal. And what he said in his CNN interview is worth sitting with for a moment. He told the interviewer, plainly and without any defensiveness, that he went to Ibiza every single year himself. Every year, with his friends. He said his life was never only tennis, tennis, and tennis. He said everyone needs to find their own space, and that some people need more of it and some people need less. But the part that really stood out was when he explained why nobody knew this about him. He said he didn't want to project that to the world because he didn't find it interesting. It was his private life, and he kept it private. Alcaraz made a different choice, chose to be open about how he resets, and Nadal said he respected that entirely. Think about what that actually means. The man who is widely considered one of the most disciplined, dedicated, and relentlessly professional athletes in the history of sport was quietly taking the same kind of breaks that people are now criticizing a 22-year-old for taking publicly. The image of Nadal as this monk-like figure who sacrificed everything for the sport, an image that Nadal himself never really corrected, turns out to have been incomplete. He had a life outside of tennis. He protected it carefully, and it clearly didn't stop him from winning 22 slams. That's not a knock on Nadal. That's actually the entire point he was making. Rest, disconnection, time with the people you love in places that make you happy, these aren't weaknesses. They aren't signs of a soft mentality or a lack of commitment. For many athletes at the absolute peak of the sport, they're the thing that makes continued excellence possible. The body recovers. The mind resets. You come back to the court hungry again instead of burned out and going through the motions. Nadal went further than defending Alcaraz's vacations. He opened up about his own mental health struggles, which is something that doesn't come easily to someone of his generation and competitive nature. He talked about 2015, a period in his career when the injuries and the pressure accumulated to a point where, even though his mind told him he could handle it, some part of him couldn't. He sought medical help. He was not fine, and he was honest enough to admit it. He said you can tell yourself you're managing everything perfectly and still reach a breaking point, and recognizing that and doing something about it isn't a weakness. It's intelligence. The sport has changed enormously in the past decade or two, and in some ways the professionalism and the scrutiny have become crushing. Every decision a top player makes is dissected. Their social media, their travel, their friendships, their dietary choices, all of it exists under a microscope. Some players have responded by retreating into total control and presenting a perfectly managed public image. Alcaraz has responded by being exactly who he is and letting people deal with it. And his results have backed him up so comprehensively that the argument against his approach has become very hard to make. Historically, it's worth noting this tension between high performance and a full personal life is not new. Marat Safin was one of the most naturally gifted players the sport has ever seen, and he was well known for living extravagantly, sometimes right up to the eve of major matches. He still won 2 Grand Slams and reached the top of the world rankings. John McEnroe and Vitas Gerulaitis in the 1980s moved in glamorous social circles and made no apologies for it, and both produced tennis that still gets discussed today. The idea that greatness requires complete self-denial has never been as universally true as people like to claim. What Nadal said about Alcaraz's Grand Slam count also deserves attention. When asked about Alcaraz's future at the Australian Open earlier this year, after Alcaraz became the youngest player in history to complete the career slam, Nadal didn't talk about potential or trajectory. He said the word prospect made no sense when describing someone with 7 major titles. He pointed out that very few players in the entire history of the sport have reached 7 slams, and that by any reasonable measure, Alcaraz was already a legend. That's not a compliment from a supportive elder statesman. That's a factual assessment from someone who understands exactly what it takes to win at that level and has done it more than almost anyone who ever played. 7 slams puts Alcaraz alongside Andre Agassi, Ivan Lendl, and Jimmy Connors in the all-time list. He is 22 years old. The wrist injury is a serious obstacle, and Nadal has spoken about that too, urging patience and caution and making clear that rushing back would be the real mistake. But the broader conversation, the one about whether Alcaraz's personality and his choices and his very public enjoyment of life away from the court are somehow incompatible with greatness, that conversation has been answered pretty clearly. By the trophies, by history, and now, by the man who knows better than almost anyone alive what it actually takes to keep winning at the highest level, who quietly did the same thing for years and never felt the need to explain himself to anyone.